Today, it may look like an ordinary mountain in northern China. But in this area, extraordinary discoveries have been made. This is the world-famous Zhoukoudian site of prehistorical human and animal remains. The Peking Man site at Zhoukoudian is the most systematic anthropological site in the world for the early Paleolithic age. The geological ages of the 27 sites at Zhoukoudian span millions of years. The vertical geological deposits at the first location are remarkably complete. From this site were unearthed tens of thousands of fossils. The finds included remains, footprints, and stones. There were 13 layers, each representing a geological age separated from the next layer by as much as hundreds of thousands of years. The distance between layers is less than 2 meters, but it often took Chinese and foreign archaeologists decades to explore just one layer. These deposits reflect hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, and they took 90 years of work to unearth. Prehistoric humans were constantly traveling through desolate, rocky and sandy areas, searching for suitable habitats. With their strong desire for survival and a better life, they eventually settled in temperate wooded areas and caves. In the mornings, Peking Man's arch-enemy, the saber-toothed tigers, hunted the forests. A huge fire at Zhoukoudian led to a surprising discovery. Peking Man had formerly not understood fire, It had seemed to be some kind of monster. Peking man was attracted by the strange aroma of meat that had been cooked in the fire. He tasted it and found it delicious. This is how they learned to eat cooked meat. But to cook meat, they needed to harness fire. Another 100,000 years passed. Saber-toothed tigers were still a threat to Peking man, but man had now mastered fire and all the other animals were afraid of it. Fire became the guardian of Peking man's cave. With the help of fire, humans evolved quickly. Natural selection was the greatest force in the biosphere. In March 1918, it was still chilly in the North China Plain. The fossils had been found at Zhoukoudian, so Anderson began to pay close attention to for Austrian scholar Otto Zadansky to explore Chicken Bone Hill. During their 3 years of exploration, they often found sharp-edged shards of quartz that showed traces of human shaping. Based on this, Anderson speculated that the remains of some hominid lay nearby, just waiting to be found. In the summer of 1926, Zadansky found a lower left premolar. It possibly belonged to an early hominid. This discovery attracted many scholars and international foundations. In 1927, Canadian scientist Davidson Black directed the establishment of a research institute for physical anthropology. The new institute concluded a cooperative agreement with the China Geological Survey to jointly excavate Zhoukoudian. This was the first time for Chinese scientists to officially participate in an archaeological dig. The sole purpose of this international cooperation was to search for remains of human ancestors. The many natural caves containing incredible numbers of fossils greatly excited Chinese and foreign scientists alike. The first major discovery was made in October 1927. Davidson Black, the archaeological team leader, announced that a human tooth had been found. Davidson Black was the first to propose that the new species of prehistorical human be called Sinanthropus pekinensis, or Peking man. They were from the Tertiary period of about 500,000 years ago. It was the oldest human fossil ever found on the Asian continent, and so at the time the news shocked the entire scientific community. Since then, the term Peking man has been in widespread use. In 1928 and 1929, a large number of animal fossils were unearthed, but the bone fossils of Peking man were still waiting to be discovered. In this old photo, we can see on the far left Pei Wenzhong, a graduate of the Department of Geology at Peking University. Pei Wenzhong was given overall responsibility for the excavations of 1929. In his diary, Pei Wenzhong wrote that things became much quieter on the mountain after the foreign experts left. He also reported that there were new discoveries every day, but never anything too exciting. On December the 2nd, Pei was working outside a cave when someone shouted, "There's something big, like the thigh of a rhino." Upon hearing these words, Pei Wenzhong immediately made his way into the cave. It's grey, fragile and wet. It could be a skull that had been here for hundreds of thousands of years. Pei simply could not believe his eyes. The warmth of the fire dried the fossil out. Soon, the whole world would be able to see this skull. On December the 28th, 1929, Chinese geologists held a special meeting at which Pei Wenzhong revealed the first complete Peking man skull to Chinese and foreign scientists and journalists. Everyone was shocked and burst into thunderous applause. This photo was taken on December the 3rd, 1929. Pei Wenzhong holds in his hand the skull of Peking man. He wrapped the skull with linen and encased it in thick plaster before sending it to Beijing for restoration. The photographer concentrated on the skull, so in the photo we can only see the tanned cheeks and rough hands of Pei Wenjong. Scientists then began to restore the skull to its original appearance, to reveal the true face of our ancestors. Pei Wenjong had made a profound scientific achievement in spite of the poor conditions in China in the early 20th century. On September the 18th, 1931, the Japanese invaded northeast China. Despite the dangerous conditions, however, the excavation at Zhoukoudian continued. Jia Lanpo was in charge of the Zhoukoudian excavation. Though he had just graduated from high school, he became one of the most important paleoanthropologists in China. From the first location came more exciting news. On the morning of November the 15th, 1936, one side of a left mandible was found, then an occipital. That night, Jia Lanpo asked his team members to reassemble the two skulls. With the scientific community still excited over the first finds, 11 days later, on November the 26th, a third skull was unearthed. The news that 3 Peking man skulls were found together further shocked the world. From 1927 to 1937, 5 skulls, 9 skull fragments, and many bone fossils were found at the first location. The fossils were estimated to have belonged to 40 different males and females of various ages. In addition, nearly 10,000 fragments of stone tools and animal and plant fossils were also unearthed. The discovery of the Peking man skulls and stone tools confirms the existence of an intermediate stage of hominid evolution and provides solid evidence for human origins and Darwin's theory of evolution. Since then, more and more people have accepted the idea that humans evolved from hominids. But on July the 7th, 1937, the Japanese invasion erupted. Beijing and nearby Zhoukoudian were occupied, and the excavation was suspended. Peking man seemed destined to suffer the catastrophe alongside the modern residents of Beijing. At the end of 1937, Kotondo Hasebi of Tokyo Imperial University and his assistant Fujui Takai visited Pei Wenjong requesting to examine the Peking man skulls. Pei Wenjong was suspicious and turned them down, fearing for the safety of the skulls. The skulls were locked in a basement safe of the Anatomy Division of the Peking Union Medical College for safekeeping. Japan had not yet declared war on the United States, so the Japanese did not dare to attack the college, which was associated with the United States. But as the US drifted toward war, it became obvious that the skulls had to be moved. The German Weidenreich, an expert on the Peking man fossils, suggested sending them to the American Museum of Natural History for further research. But it was clearly stipulated in the Sino-US agreement that everything unearthed in Zhoukoudian would belong to China and could not be shipped abroad. There were three options under consideration. The first was to ship them to the provisional capital of Chongqing via occupied areas. The second was to bury them in Beijing. And the third was to ship them to the United States via Qinhuangdao. And this was the chosen approach. The Peking man skulls were to be packed by the Consulate General on December the 5th, 1941, shipped to Qinhuangdao via the United States military train, and finally transported to the US by ship. On December the 8th, 1941, the train arrived in Qinhuangdao. But then, on December the 7th, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, marking the start of the Pacific War. The Japanese landed at Shanhaiguan, broke through the United States military defenses, and captured the US Marine train. The skulls were last seen in late November 1941 when they were packed at Peking Union Medical College. The skulls should have been sent to the United States Consulate in December. The two boxes of fossils should have been transferred to the United States Marine train on December the 5th. It's not certain whether something happened to them at the Tianjin dock. The train arrived at Qinhuangdao on December the 8th, but the US military base there was then occupied by the Japanese. It seemed that the story ended there, but 6 months later, the Japanese announced that the skulls stored in the Peking Union Medical College had been stolen. The Japanese military ordered a search for the missing Peking man fossils. A year later, Zhoukoudian, despondent over his failure to find the fossils, attempted suicide in Beijing's Xicheng district. The Peking man fossils had disappeared without a trace. Whether they were destroyed in the war or fell into Chinese or foreign hands is one of the greatest archaeological mysteries of the 20th century. In 1953, the Chinese government established a permanent museum at the site of Peking man at Zhoukoudian. The idea that humans are evolved from hominids was then only a hypothesis, but Peking man provided conclusive evidence. It could be said that human beings only began to truly understand their own past when the first Peking man skulls were unearthed on December the 2nd, 1929. It's been about a century since that discovery, but we cannot forget the Chinese and foreign scientists who participated in the discovery, excavation and research at the Zhoukoudian site. The Zhoukoudian site was discovered by the Swedish geologist Johan Gunnar Andersson. The first to study the Peking man fossils was the Canadian anatomist Davidson Black. The first director of the Zhoukoudian excavation team was the geologist Li Jie. Young Zhoukoudian paleontologist was the first to study the strata and mammalian fossils at the Zhoukoudian site. The paleontologist Pei Wenzhong discovered the first Peking man skull fossils. Paleoanthropologist Jia Lanpo discovered 3 Peking man skulls. The German anatomist Franz Weidenreich conducted the first systematic study of the Peking man fossils. Through these archaeological layers, we see the past as well as the future. Since walking upright, humans have never stopped moving forward.